On behalf of the Shelter Island Library, thank you so much for coming, and we would also like to thank Peter Lighte for being here with us once again. Peter is here tonight. He's going to talk about his book, Straight Through the Labyrinth, and give us a little bit of his story. And just real quick, the door is open, the bathroom's inside if you need, and there is bug spray on the table in the back. Okay?
And be careful of all the cords.
Oh yes, be careful of all the cords. Thank you.
Try and speak without the mic, if that's okay. Tell me if it's a problem. I think this evening is a long Peter?
Yeah. It's a problem.
I couldn't hear him for the recording.
Okay. How's that, okay?
Yeah.
Okay. I think tonight is all about belonging. And I feel that I certainly feel like I belong on Shelter Island, although I've only been here 21 years with Julian and the girls. I'm a newcomer. But this was home for the girls who thought this was America because we would come here for every summer, no matter where we lived all over the world. So Shelter Island's very important. And also there's stars, and Hay Beach, and the library, much of which is responsible for my writing. I spend a lot of time here, so I'm very grateful to this place. I'm also in the... It's also a great privilege to be in the presence, maybe not both tonight, but of two authors, local authors that I'm very fond of, Karen Kyer and Giovanni Picosa. I cannot help but recall one year at reunions at Princeton, I was on a panel to talk about my favorite book or a book that changed my life. I can't remember. And I was the last one to speak. And everyone spoke about his or her own book. And then it came to me, and that's the last thing I intended to do. So it reminded me of a story. There's a program on the radio in England called Desert Island Discs. And every Sunday, a famous person comes on and picks 8 records that's very dear to them, and one can be chosen to take away on a desert island if stranded. Everyone is very gracious and picks many things. And then Elizabeth Schwarzkopf was on, the great German opera singer, and she picked 8 of her own songs. So tonight, this is my night. I'd also like to mention that the proceeds of the book go to a wonderful organization based in Trenton, New Jersey. It's called Capital Harmony Works. Julian's been very active, we've been very active. It's an organization that's putting music tuition back into the schools that have been bled dry for the arts. Julian was twice chair, and I sometimes wash dishes. Just a bit of background. It was identified very young, when I was very young, that I was very gifted and very special, and this was the single bit of evidence that convinced people of this. I was able to sing Opus 191, number 4, of the Estudianto Waltz by Emil Waldteufel. For those of you who are here, who are old enough to know what I'm talking about, I will now try to sing it. My beer is Rheingold, the dry beer. And my uncle decided I was a genius because I could sing a beer commercial. Well, it took a long time for me to finally distinguish myself again, truly, and something that was very meaningful. And these are readings really about my bloody-mindedness. And otherwise, I would not have my family. It's as simple as that. And so Hattie and Tilly, both our girls are here. Julian is here. So that's why I'm nervous, actually, because the girls are here. But, okay, never mind. I might even take my jacket off because I'm sweating in this freezing cold. I'd like to start by telling you what the book is really about. It's really a literary Venn diagram of sinology, which is the study of China, sexuality, and adoption. This book places me, a gay scholar of China, right in the crosshairs of the very history I had studied. With the adoption of our daughter caught up in Hong Kong's handover back to China in 1997, I was served well by my emotional antenna and study of the Chinese classics. Navigating my way through daunting bureaucracy and unforeseen drama, I prevailed, likely becoming Hong Kong's first adoptive gay father. Turn off the phone. Everyone, no devices. A second daughter was soon to follow, a story no less fraught, completing a two-father family way ahead of its time. This is, as I said, a saga of bloody-mindedness, empathy, and good fortune. Straight Through the Labyrinth reminds readers that purposeful synchronicity can indeed thrash anything in the way of love. I can't resist reading the first paragraph of the foreword that was written by Anne-Marie Slaughter and Andy Moravchik, friends from Princeton. And this will show you how much we have progressed, but will also remind us not to be complacent about what we have achieved. This is what they wrote. About a decade ago, after returning from a sabbatical in Shanghai, we threw a small holiday party. Anne-Marie's parents were visiting from Virginia. Peter Lighte and his husband Julian Grant, who had also recently left China to settle in Princeton, New Jersey, came, and I'm quoting here, their charming and dashing selves. A lot. After we sent them off into the frosty December night with warm goodbyes, the four of us settled back around the fire for a last drink. Mom and Dad commented on what a remarkable coincidence it was that both Peter and Julian had been in China and that each had adopted a daughter in China who was now attending school in Princeton. It took us a moment to sort out that what they meant before we realized that they had no inkling that Peter and Julian were a couple. They had simply assumed that the respective spouses were both absent that evening. We explained and all laughed, although with some incredulity on our part. So we are mindful of progress, but nervous about the future. Now, let's get down to brass tacks. Sorry about the mic. Okay. I'd like to explain that to adopt in China, when we did, there was a rule that unmarried people of any persuasion could not adopt jointly. So our view was that what's the point of making a big stink politically and end up with no kid? So I adopted as a single father. There was no alternative. So we had to do all these disappearing acts when authorities would show up to check out our house, talk to us about details, except that it only could be me, because there was this window when a single person could adopt. And that does not exist anymore, by the way. So I'd like to describe the two women from the social agency who came to our house to inspect the house and inspect me and not have a clue about Julian. I mean, it's almost a Marx Brothers movie with nobody in it. So this leads up to the arrival of the two women from Caritas, which is a social agency, to do the home study. I received a message that Tiffany and Brenda would be doing their home study on September 17th. Since I was presenting myself as a single prospective father, Julian could not be present for the Caritas home visit. He assured me that he would be gone before the ladies arrived and would wait for me at the Mandarin Coffee Shop, this is in Hong Kong, a legendary gathering spot, both posh and pedestrian, where you could get the best Bloody Marys along with bowls of piping hot noodles. As we planned his timely exit from the flat when Tiffany and Brenda were scheduled to arrive, I was struck by his generous disappearance from an undertaking in which he was gradually belonging. Once again, that word again, belonging. I sensed that he wasn't simply afraid of things going wrong for me. Rather, even if he were nowhere to be seen, he was finding his way into a welcome joint venture. While we both lacked the familiar markers that might have provided guidance in creating a family, our take on the mysterious way forward defined us. Whereas I came to regard the prospect of becoming a father as a way to participate in childhood, Julian could only fret, assuming a flawed replay. But when it came to my idée fixe, he was willing to consider a life very unlike the stereotypical gay future that he assumed would be awaiting him. The appointment was for 11 a.m. Under ordinary circumstances, I would arrive early and already be tapping my foot in frustration when the others turned up on time. On this, you know what I mean. You know, old people turn up early. But I did it when I was young. On this occasion, I left my office at 10 for the quick taxi ride home, allowing me the chance to cool off and change my shirt so I could appear composed, taking events in my stride. While pulling up the steep drive to the front door of the building, I noticed a shop-worn van parked off to the side, hands waving through the tinted windows, and realized the ladies had come early. I did not acknowledge their presence, but instead ducked into the lobby, called upstairs to alert Julian to the change of plans, and prayed that I could make it into the lift before Tiffany and Brenda caught up with me. Then, while opening our front door, I heard both the back door slam as Julian made his exit and the lobby buzzer ring. I tell you, it was like Marx Brothers. I nonchalantly asked who it was, feigning surprise at hearing my guests' voices. I let them into the building, leaving our door open as I whizzed about to ensure everything was in order. Seeing Julian's keyboard as I entered his study, in a panic I imagined being asked to play a song when I couldn't even turn on the console. Still, I managed enough composure to greet the people who could, in a flash, either dash or realize my hopes for adoption. Then, just as I dared relax to push ahead with this deal-breaking encounter, my gaze was drawn toward the ceiling, where the fan was mysteriously slowing down, bearing witness to Julian's hasty exit. That the ladies took no notice did little to calm me. I feared there was peril in complacency, even when being out of harm's way. Tiffany and Brenda were thrilled by the stunning view from the balcony of our flat, checking and clucking in Cantonese about distinct points of interest before switching back into English and formally suggesting that we proceed with the required tour. As though on automatic pilot, they headed for the kitchen, which in a Chinese home is a place of fragrant magic, but because it is not a public room and is usually a servant's domain, it gets short shrift when it comes to design and appointment. Though ours was no exception, being narrow and L-shaped and seemingly built for maximum inconvenience, they were not put off by it. Next, they headed for Julian's studio with its closed door. I figured that if I opened it wide before they had time to ask me to do so, their interest would be minimal. They gave the room a glance, did the same for the others, not even asking which would be the babies, and sauntered back into the sitting room, disappearing into our massive Chesterfield sofa opposite windows, offering a vista of distant Kowloon. As they started fumbling for papers, I immediately excused myself to prepare refreshments. Returning with a tray to their puzzled expressions, I mentioned that the Jewish New Year was upon us, and I wanted to wish them a sweet year with honey cake. They put down their folders quizzically and looked at each other, suddenly transforming the interview into a sunny exchange. I soon realized that the issues of greatest importance to me were of less concern to them than my financial status, since my tax returns, broker's reports, and pay slips had all been impeccably presented. There was little official business to transact. Yet despite their ease, I remained vigilant, even as they were taking their leave. While I waited at the lift to see them off, Brenda said, "I wish you would adopt us." Gets me every time. With their van barely out of sight, I just about flew downstairs and out the door to meet Julian for those Bloody Marys. I'd like to make mention of an encounter that I had yesterday, which speaks about belonging on this island. Well, Catherine, who's here, and I were chatting, and she was talking about my book, and she was talking about how badly she had wanted to become a parent. And she said she thinks she understood how I felt. And she said, it's like the tolling of Big Ben inside of you. And I tell you, stop me dead in my tracks, and I will take that with me. And I thank you. Okay, next. I'd like to now describe the day I became a father in Hangzhou, where the kid in the checkerboard shirt back there is the kid we dragged home. Hatton, baby Hatton. At 8:30 the next morning, Monday, October 6th, we walked across the road from the hotel to the Ministry of Civil Affairs, the baby's whereabouts unbeknownst to us. After climbing up cement stairs in a typically dingy government building, we entered a large room lined with boxy brown sofas and a massive table crammed with fake plants at its hollowed-out center. The table was encircled by many people, and I struggled to discern the dynamics of the cast. Suddenly, I caught sight of a tiny girl, and then seemed to fall into a cognitive abyss, delaying awareness of my wisp of a daughter, dressed in a yellow and white outfit, nose running, clasping a packet of biscuits in each hand, and paying full attention only to them. As I reached over, my cousin Myrna came with me. She's sadly passed away. She was 6'1", had no emotions, flat as a pancake, and was the perfect antidote for me because I was just a wreck. And she wouldn't have it. So she was the right person to pick, and I bless her for coming with me. As I reached over to Myrna to brace myself, a woman quietly volunteered that the baby's usual ration was 1 packet of crackers per day. While being led off for more administrative matters, I noticed Myrna sidling up to the sofa, very sensitive to my baby. I expected primordial fireworks to erupt within me, but there was no emotional surge, even as I gazed at Hattie. Then I went blank. Of all things, an experience I had had at the Wailing Wall flashed before me. On my first trip to Israel to attend a wedding in the 1980s, I kept preparing myself for a poignant rush I would surely have as I stood before Judaism's most iconic site. When I finally arrived, though, I lacked the wherewithal to take in the unfathomable and realized that being emotionally tabula rasa was the epiphany. Hattie was already holding her own against the Second Temple. At the very moment that I was meant to become a father to my child, formalities kept me from her. Only by putting my spirit off to the side and reserving it for my girl was I able to mechanically apply my thumbprint to 5 documents. Hattie would later be doing the same. I was then told to write a prescribed note explaining why I wanted to adopt a baby. I dutifully promised that I would not mistreat her and added that I had always wanted to become a father. Next, I paid a fee, which had to be in the local currency, heartening since monkey business was usually conducted in foreign exchange. Then I was able to approach my girl with both reverence and speed, sitting down near her. Finally paying no mind to the possible effect of a lunging giant might have on a tiny baby, I swept Hattie up in my arms, a broad gesture to which she did not even react. Of all things, I caught sight of my red watch band, which had served me well. By the way, the Chinese believe red is very lucky, and I got it in my head once that I had to get a red watch band. And so I went into this fancy watch store and I said, I need a red watch band. And he was disgusted with my bad taste. And he said, oh, I might have one here. And I was delighted to unload it. So the Chinese and the Jews both agree that red is lucky. And maybe that's why we all end up in Chinese restaurants on Christmas. I caught sight of my red watch band, which had served us well. I had held many babies, but this was my baby, my 20-month-old daughter. I grew uneasy at trying to calibrate my hug about her wispy frame, and was startled to notice light-colored locks feathered beneath her dark head of hair, a sign of malnutrition. No wonder she was clinging to the crackers. Her hair is mighty dark now, I might add. I sang a lullaby called Schluf mein Fegele in her ear. It was the first lullaby my mother had ever sang to me and her mother to her, and walked out onto the balcony, pointing to the buses and trucks speeding noisily beneath us. She couldn't resist the hubbub. That she was in my arms did not seem to matter to her, since she had likely been carried by many. She could not know that my arms would forever be around her. I figured that it was not for me to proclaim that mine was the hug of a father, but something only Hattie herself could someday come to know. Getting out of the baby's way, I happily watched the traffic below upstage me, taking delight in my new daughter's amusement. So we have two daughters, so they need equal time. This is for you, Till. Okay. So fast forward, we were in Beijing. We ended up being in Beijing from 2007 to 2010, and Hattie had a bas mitzvah in Beijing. And if you think this evening was difficult to organize, you simply cannot imagine what a bas mitzvah in Beijing is like. It was just, but when we realized we were moving back to the United States, Tilly was 12, and we thought, oh God, she's going to have some dreary bas mitzvah in a New Jersey synagogue with a basement, and, you know, just some dreary, horrible place. So what I learned was that girls can have bas mitzvahs at 12. So Julian and I shifted into high gear, and we arranged for Tilly to have a bas mitzvah in Beijing that was going to be completely different than her sister's. That was paramount. So let me read you a little bit of that from the book. Although the girls were both born in February, 2 years apart, we agreed that another winter bas mitzvah was out of the question. You can't believe how cold it is in Beijing. In February, it's murder. It's really cold. We agreed that another winter bas mitzvah was out of the question, opting instead for springtime festivities. But aside from signing Allison, who was a journalist and a photographer, and now she's a director of movies, Allison Clayman. She did a movie on Ai Weiwei called Never Sorry. She was also a most knowledgeable Jewess who took on the tutoring of the girls. But aside from signing Allison on as Tilly's tutor, inviting Rabbi Osrin back for a return engagement, we had flown him over from Jerusalem the year before because we knew him from when he named the girls in Hong Kong, where he had been residing at the time that we adopted the girls. So we're big on continuity, so we just flew him back. We did not want to simply repeat the activities of Hattie's Bas Mitzvah, which presented a challenging predicament. I happened to bump into a chap I knew who was a colleague called Joan van Vasselhoven, a former Belgian banking colleague, who mentioned his involvement in a restoration project off the northeast corner of the Forbidden City. I discovered that the 18th century Jeju temple featured on Joan's card and had been built on the grounds of an even older sutra printing shop, establishing the site's bona fide Buddhist connection. I was hooked already because it was so strange, and I didn't know what it looked like, and I didn't know what it was all about, but I said, we have to look into this. Enchanted by the prospect of Tilly's celebration being held in a place vibrating with such history, I called and booked the venue sight unseen, assured that there was enough time to prepare the space. Once we had returned from Shelter Island at the end of the summer, our departure from Beijing, though a school year away, was quickly approaching, and Tilly's upcoming Bas Mitzvah in April not far off. As preparation began, she, unlike her sister, couldn't wait to sprint to the local seamstress. Tilly opted for the Audrey Hepburn look of simple color blocks and silk. She remains very tasteful. Julian arranged a concert for guests the Thursday prior to Tilly's ceremony, and we were pleasantly surprised that many out-of-towners joined us. Tilly took delight in the fact that 60 guests from abroad, 20 more than had shown up for her sister's Bas Mitzvah, were attending, to which Hattie reposted, "Mine was in February. What do you expect?" Nothing changes. After finally being given the all clear, Julian and I visited the venue Tuesday before Tilly's Bas Mitzvah. The clouds were low, with an unseasonably wintry chill in the air as we struggled to find the place. Once within the temple precinct, behind a rusted, groaning doorway, we stood in mud, with an exposed septic tank blocking our way. Joan was soon rushing towards us, his effusive warmth and outsized grin doing little to put us at ease. Assuring us that an army of workers was on call to submerge the septic tank by Saturday morning, he hurried us into the temple with its forest of massive red pillars, distracting us from a construction site mere feet away. Our feeling of awe as our eyes swept towards the roof, supported by the grove of vermilion columns, temporarily relieved our anxiety. We then visited a nearby modern building where a lunch and a French fare would be served. Since the facility did not have a Chinese kitchen that could accommodate our group, we had hired a caterer from a continental bistro offering scrumptious food. Reassured by Joan and the elegant vestiges of history that our event would be successful, we beat a hasty retreat, hoping for the best. On the morning of the Bas Mitzvah, the sun shone, and the septic tank, as promised, was nowhere to be seen. We were greeted by a country and western band, this is really coached by Julian, in the klezmer style. A group looking more like the Village People than Ashkenazi music makers. The temple's impressive interior did little to keep our guests warm, despite the calendar saying it was springtime. But there Tilly stood, an electrifying waif of a kid, managing to enliven Leviticus with a voice oozing moxie, her sound soaring high within the reborn house of worship. There's one last comment, just to sum it up. It's not necessarily in the book, but you just have to know what a Herculean task this was, that I need to keep remembering because it all came right. It all seemed so natural. So holding, when the girls were home, we had this family. We didn't know what we were doing, but no parents know what they're doing. So so holding those two babies in my arms for the first time at the tail end of the 20th century was anything but inevitable. After all, mine had not been a life hurtling purposefully through time, a childhood cut short by parental divorce and a fraught upbringing, an obsession with China that marked my studies and career, an understanding of my homosexuality while at Princeton, and finding Julian that had all led me on myriad detours that became my path. As a result, my becoming a father was thwarted neither by society's barriers to my sexual orientation, nor by an itinerant career that took me far and wide around the world. In fact, it was susceptibility to distraction and adventure that saw me to fatherhood. There was no way to have prepared myself for the dramas that seemed to conspire, pushing children beyond my grasp. And it took more than an iron will to fuel a spirit enabling me to outrun that receding horizon. Had bloody mindedness not been leavened by upbringing, education, escapades, romance, and Julian, I just might never have become the first single father in Hong Kong to have adopted children from mainland China. God is good. Oh, yeah. God is good. Any questions? Any questions?
Here.
Oh, hello. Yes.
Hi.
Yes, use the mic.
Oh, sure. Sorry. Yeah.
Peter, after the first adoption came through, did you feel like you had to continue the charade and that if somehow they found out you were gay, that there'd be a problem?
The charade, it continued. It had to continue. But what's really interesting is, I think in China, that if things aren't discussed, they aren't. So, I mean, I used to be 6'5", but there I was 6'5", chairman of J.P. Morgan in China with some guy I lived with and 2 babies. I mean, I don't know what they thought. And furthermore, I didn't care. We went about our lives, and that's just the way it was. But now, adoption from China is almost impossible. Aside from the spigot having been shut off, there are the 5 no's. You can't adopt if you are obese, on antidepressants, gay, single, or over 50.
Wow.
So there would be no one from the Upper West Side to adopt. So all we did was live our lives. Any other questions? Yeah. Right.
With the changes going on in China and especially in relation to Hong Kong,
Right.
Can you give us any, I'm sure that's a much longer answer, but can you give any of your thoughts about that, given that you live there in a different time?
Sure. I think, in a funny way, it leads right on from what I was saying about the smoke and mirrors, that combination is respected by the Chinese. So, for example, I have to come out and tell you I'm an avid Democrat, but I think Nancy Pelosi's trip to Taiwan was a disaster. And it poked the Chinese in the eye, and things have really deteriorated since then. And I think we have to hold back from that. And I think we have to continue to subscribe to the Shanghai Communique agreed by Henry Kissinger and Zhou Enlai in 1972, that there is one China. If the Taiwan government believes there's one China looking westward, and the Beijing government thinks there's one China looking eastward, what's the problem? Why don't we just stay out of it? It's also worth remembering that China is completely encircled by enemies. So let them deal with that.
Yeah, but Taiwan is where they make semiconductors that we use in the United States and China.
So what?
So
There's enough for everybody. In fact, there was an article in the Times yesterday. It was really interesting. And it was entitled something about China's decline. And I really think that the troubles that they're having are very real. And this is the time for America to be magnanimous, because it is in China's best interest for America to succeed. China is the largest holder of treasury bills in the world. It is not in their vested interest for us to fail. That's just what I believe. So we have to find a way to make diplomacy work. We have to stop poking people in the eye. We have to make them behave by our good behavior. I also think the tariffs that the previous president put in should be withdrawn immediately. That's an easy thing to do, but because of the people who are paying for blood now when it comes to China, it's a very difficult thing to do. But I hope the administration has the wherewithal to do it. So I remain hopeful if we behave ourselves. They will behave because they're in trouble. So, any other stuff you want to talk about?
Peter,
Yeah.
I've read your book. It was fabulous. You keep a diary.
Oh.
There's so much information. I was just wondering if you're a diary keeper.
It's funny, I'm a diary keeper, and I never consult the diaries. It's really very strange. I think the only time I consulted the diaries for this book was for dates, very specific information. But all of the other stuff, it's all inside. It's quite amazing. I think when it comes to my family, I have real total recall of only wonderful things. Yeah.
Peter, do you think that there's some sort of benefit and maybe even detriment to being a gay father versus a heterosexual father to your daughters? I mean, do you have a feeling for that? Because you would have experienced it.
Yeah. Well, little girls rarely hate their fathers, and they've got two. So, I mean, look, we are capable of screwing up our children just like everybody else. I have every confidence in that. So I think every sort of permutation, it faces the same pitfalls. So the one thing that is interesting that's worth chatting about, when we adopted the girls, we lost a lot of gay friends. Because we weren't living that life, with antiques and pussycats. Not at all, not at all. And what we did end up coming to know was this demographic of kids' parents in schools, and we made wonderful friends, just wonderful friends. We picked up people in Patton's Thieves because they looked at us, they thought we looked neat, and they looked neat, so we became friends. And it happens all over the place. So it's never really been a problem. And I think it's because Julian and I are tall.
Are you spending time in China now at all, or what is your no?
I'm happily retired in New Jersey, and I think I was in China the last time maybe 7 years ago. But it's interesting, the minister of the government who helped us get the children, who became a very dear friend, he was a very significant man, and he was sadly since died, who was really the godfather of our family. His granddaughter ended up spending several months with us during the pandemic because she was stranded. So this friendship persists and goes on. So the relationship.
I wonder about that. Maybe it's a question for your daughters, but what is you adopted them in China and now you're here.
But I think you have to remember, after we adopted them when we lived in Hong Kong, and we didn't move to China till years later. So they got to know China under their own steam. And that's where they learned to speak Chinese, which they will not speak to me now, by the way. They both understand it. One studied Sanskrit and one studied Japanese, so you can tell them, what they think of me. But, it's worked out. It's worked out. Yeah.
Peter, can you talk about how you discovered the island, how you discovered this place, and what made you want to have a home?
When we were living in Hong Kong, we had friends there. I don't know if any of you know Christine Houston. And she had a daughter who was Hattie's first friend. And as we became closer, Christine said, "Why don't you visit us on Shelter Island?" So we came in the summer of '71, 2001. Sorry, we came in 2001, and we stayed in what was the name of the place? One of the guest houses that's had 20 restaurants in it. Never mind. But they didn't take children, so the girls stayed with Christine in her house. And then the next summer we rented, and then the next summer, Georgiana Ketchum, may she rest in peace, sold us our house. And you're stuck with us. Here we are. Yeah. So.
You're stuck with us.
Yeah. Anything else? Well, thank you very much for coming. I really appreciate it. Thank you.